So in this lesson, we're going to go through a couple examples of solving inequalities and talk about how this is different than solving an equation. So the first example we're going to start with is 2 times the quantity h plus 6, not b, 6, being greater than or equal to negative 3 times the quantity 8 minus h. So at first glance, really the only difference in this case is this inequality symbol. So I'm going to go ahead and start solving. And the first thing I'm going to do is distribute on both sides since they both have parentheses. So this is going to give me 2h plus 12. And just one thing I've noticed with our solving equations practice, make sure you are distributing to this second term as well and not just the first with multiplication. And then negative 3 times 8 is going to give me negative 24. Negative 3 times h is going to give me positive 3h. Now, personally, I prefer to have the h coefficient positive if I have h's on both sides or variables on both sides. So I'm going to subtract from both sides the 2h so that I know h is going to have a positive coefficient, which in this case is just going to leave me with 1h, which is perfect because now I only have one step left. I'm going to add 24 to both sides. So this tells me 36 is greater than or equal to h. So this, if you prefer to have the inequality on the right hand or the left hand side, you can very easily switch this from the right to the left. So the other option is if it's on the left and I'm relating this to 36, 36 is bigger than h, so I need to show that in my inequality as well. So these two statements mean exactly the same thing. H is the smaller thing, 36 is the bigger thing. So if we were asked to graph this on a number line, normally if I'm graphing this by hand on a number line, I just do 3 numbers on my number line. So since these are positive values, the next one down is going to be 35. The next one up would be 37. So what we're doing is we're showing that all of the numbers below or at exactly 36 will work to make our original inequality statement true. So I'm going to put, in this case, a closed-in circle above 36, which represents the equal to part of my inequality. And then because it's all the numbers that are smaller than 36, I'm going to put my arrow to the left. And if the question asked you to graph the answer to your inequality as well, you would give them this graphing piece and either one of these statements above. So the next question, we're actually going to do 2 different ways so that you can see either way you would still end up getting the same answer. So I'm going to start this off the exact same way both times by getting rid of my denominator of 2. So this would leave me with 7 minus 2y being less than 8. I'm going to focus this just a little bit better. Ooh, that made it way worse. There we go. Okay. So because this first way of solving it, I'm going to force my inequality to have a positive coefficient in front of my variable. I'm going to add 2y, which is going to leave me with 7 being less than 2y plus 8. Now I would have to subtract 8. So this would be negative 1 being less than 2y. Then my last step will be divide by 2. So this is going to tell me negative 1/2 is less than y, or y is greater than negative 1/2. Both of these statements are equal or represent the exact same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this on the number line. Now because this is, we can't see it. Now because this is negative, remember, if I'm going to the left, I'm actually getting larger in the actual number, but because it's negative, I'm farther away from 0. So these numbers are going in the opposite direction. So I would go negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, and so on. And then going in this direction, I'm getting closer to 0. So my next whole number would actually be 0. Since there's no equal to here, I'm going to put an open circle, which means to the person looking at this, negative 1/2 is not included. And then it's all the numbers that are bigger than that. So I'm going to go to the right. Now this answer part is not going to change when I solve it differently. So my first step would be exactly the same. What's going to happen is my second step here is going to be the same, or is going to be different, excuse me, if I am not worrying about my coefficient being positive. I do not care which method you prefer. You can use whatever method works better for your brain. If this worked really well and you remember this, that's fine. But we are going to look at the other way just so that you understand what the difference is between the two and what you have to do to make sure that you do this correctly if you're doing it this way. So I'm going to subtract 7 first. So I'm going to have negative 2y being less than 1. And now I'm dividing by negative 2. So I'm going to get y and negative 1/2, and that part's going to be the same. The issue is, because I've divided by a negative number, remember, multiplying or dividing by a negative gives me the opposite of what I had before. I also have to do the opposite inequality sign because I'm completely changing the sign of everything I've been dealing with. I also need to change my inequality sign. So one thing that's really important to remember, if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to switch the inequality sign. That's essential because I am changing the value of the numbers I've been dealing with. So I have to also then change and manipulate the inequality sign. So let's look at another one that we could do like that, 2 different ways. And for this question, I'm going to do it both ways again. So I'm going to have 7 minus x divided by 2 being greater than or equal to 8. So if I was going to leave my coefficient positive throughout this entire process, I have to actually force it to be positive right off the bat. So I'm going to add this fraction to the other side so that I'm forcing that coefficient to be positive. And before I deal with the fraction, I'm going to get all of my constants together. So this will leave me with -1 being greater than or equal to x divided by 2. And now I'm multiplying by 2, which isn't changing the sign of my inequality or my actual numbers or variables because I'm just multiplying by a positive. So I'm not switching the sign. I'm leaving it exactly as it is. And if your coefficient in front of your variable is positive, and all you're doing is adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing, and your multiplication and division are all positive numbers, you're not going to have to worry about flipping your inequality sign. So then graphing this, remember when we're in negatives, these are going in the opposite direction. There's an equal to here, so I'm going to fill in the circle. And it's numbers that are less, so I'm going to the left. Now let's say I wasn't going to do that method and I was going to do the other method. Well, I would subtract 7 first. Now you can choose to do this next part in 2 steps or in 1 step. I have to deal with the fact that I have a negative number and a fraction that are both with x. So when I multiply here, in order to get rid of the denominator and create 1 in my denominator instead, I have to multiply by 2. But since x is negative and I need x to be positive, I also have to multiply by a negative. So I'm multiplying both sides by -2, which is changing the sign on my number, So I also have to change the sign of my inequality. And my screen froze, so just give it a second. There we go. So now I have the same statements because I switched my inequality sign, because I'm switching the sign of both sides of my statement. And then our very last example. Now I see that my coefficient in front of x is negative. If you prefer to force your coefficient to be positive, pause the video, do all the work for making it a positive coefficient right off the bat. And when you're done solving, start the video again and see if you get to the same answer. So I'm going to start by subtracting 9 from both sides. This is going to leave me with 12. I'm going to divide by -4. This is going to leave me with x and -3. But because I changed the sign of both sides of my inequality, I also have to change the sign of my inequality itself. So this is going to say x is less than negative 3. Negative 3 is not included, so it gets an open circle, and it's less than, so it's going to be all the numbers to the left.